Every morning, a small rectangle screams at me until I obey. I usually ignore it a few times. It often wakes up the rest of the house before it wakes me up. I've tried putting it across the room. I've tried apps that forced me to solve math problems. I even tried a second rectangle. None of it worked. My ancestor would probably be disappointed. He'd regret every tiger he fought, every infected wound he survived, every terrible decision that somehow kept the bloodline alive long enough for me to be born and hit snooze. And to be fair, if this is all he knew about me, he'd probably think I'm lazy. But he'd also be missing one important detail. He never had to wake up like this. Did our ancestors have alarms? Did they even need them? In 2017, anthropologist David Sampson traveled to northern Tanzania to study the Hadza, one of the last remaining hunter-gatherer populations on Earth. The question was deceptively simple. How did humans sleep before alarms? So he strapped motion tracking devices to Hadza adults and monitored them for 20 days. If you've ever imagined our ancestors collapsing around a fire and sleeping like the dead until sunrise, that's not what they found. Across the entire study, there were only 18 minutes when everyone was asleep at the same time. 18 minutes. For 99.8% of the night, at least one person was awake. An older man waking up early, someone rolling over, someone staying up later than everyone else. The group never truly switched off. It breathed, it shifted, it watched itself. For most of human history, that may have been enough. You didn't need an alarm clock if someone in your group was already awake. Nature had its own cues. The sun rose, birds started calling, life moved with the rhythms around you. But eventually, human life stopped moving to nature's schedule. Hunter-gatherers weren't attending quarterly meetings. They didn't have trains to catch, markets to open, or ships leaving at dawn. Cities don't run on vibes. As societies grew larger and more complicated, waking up stopped being a personal problem and became a logistical one. People had to invent ways to wake each other up. In ancient Rome, wealthy families had servants whose job was remarkably simple: make sure everyone got out of bed. Having an alarm used to be a status symbol. If someone else got you out of bed every morning, you were doing pretty well. Monasteries developed their own rhythms. Long before dawn, bells pulled people out of bed and into prayer. The bell didn't care what mood you were in. It told you what mattered, and if you ignored it, people noticed. Monastic life ran on routine. Miss enough prayers, and it wasn't seen as poor time management. It was a moral failure. Medieval towns borrowed that logic. Church bells rang across crowded streets to announce worship, the opening of markets, warnings of fire, and moments of danger. It was basically an entire city sharing one very loud iPhone. The difference was that nobody got to choose the ringtone. Out beyond the city walls, farmers used a different alarm: nature. They worked with daylight, seasons, and weather, rising when conditions demanded it, and stopping when the land said enough. Sailors, on the other hand, watched the stars and organized life around shifts, tides, and survival. At sea, time wasn't about productivity, it was about staying alive. Each society had its own alarm, but those alarms answered to something bigger than the individual: the harvest, religion, the weather, the safety of the ship, the needs of the community. Then came factories, and factories demanded something different. If hundreds of people had to work the same machines at the same time, everyone had to show up together. A few minutes late didn't just inconvenience you, it slowed production, it cost money. Factories were ruthless. They didn't care if your baby had cried all night. They didn't care if it was freezing outside. They didn't care if you felt tired. The machine was running. Be there. So factories got their own alarm: the whistle. It blasted across entire towns at the start of the shift, at lunch, and at the end of the day. You didn't have to own a clock to know what time it was. The factory told you. The church bell had once said, "Come pray." The factory whistle said, "Get to work." Entire towns began organizing themselves around shift changes. Streets filled and emptied at predictable hours. Schools adapted. Trains adapted. Families adapted. Time stopped being something you observed. It became something you obeyed. Industrial workers in Britain hired people called knocker-uppers. Their job was exactly what it sounds like. They walked through dark streets carrying long sticks or pea shooters, tapping bedroom windows until workers got out of bed. Then in 1787, an American inventor named Levi Hutchins built one of the first mechanical alarm clocks. It had one setting: 4 a.m. That was not a bug, that was the feature. 4 a.m. was when Levi wanted to wake up, so 4 a.m. was when the clock rang. If you wanted to wake up at 5:30, well, that's too bad. The first alarm clock in history basically said, "I can solve waking people up forever, as long as everyone agrees to be Levi Hutchins." Eventually, someone had the obvious follow-up question: what if people wanted to choose their own time? Then a whole industry appeared: adjustable alarm clocks. At first, they were sold as luxury. Rich people, as you can imagine, got them first. The stick guy was still doing his rounds because most workers can't afford luxury. Then factories started giving them away for good prices. You could take home a full week's pay, or 6 days' wages and a clock. For a lot of people, that trade made perfect sense. The little machine on the bedside table wasn't just a gadget. It protected your paycheck, because being on time meant keeping more of the money you'd you'd earned. People loved it. Tomorrow morning, this machine would make sure you didn't screw it up. At some point, the alarm clock stopped being an invention and became furniture. Something you gave to your kids. Something that sat quietly beside your bed. Every night, millions of people wound it, set it, and trusted it with the first decision of the next day. Then the 20th century happened. Electricity replaced springs. The bells got louder. Then they got smaller. Alarm clocks moved from the bedside table onto wristwatches, then onto digital displays. And somewhere along the way, they stopped feeling like miracles. Nobody looked at an alarm clock anymore and thought, thank God I won't miss work. They just thought, ugh. People argued with it, hit it, threw it across the room, set 5 alarms because they didn't trust themselves, snoozed one, then another, then another. Every night you set an alarm because the version of you going to bed had hopes. Tomorrow I'll wake up early. Tomorrow I'll go to the gym. Tomorrow I'll get my life together. Then morning came, and the version of you lying under a warm blanket had very different priorities. For the first time in history, waking up wasn't a negotiation between you and the sun, or you and the church bell, or you and the factory whistle. It was a negotiation between 2 versions of yourself. The optimistic idiot who set the alarm, and the tired idiot who had to listen to it. Maybe the alarm clock wasn't the problem. Maybe the problem was that the person who makes promises at night and the person who has to keep them in the morning are not the same person.